من تصبر يصبره الله, which means whoever, tasabbara means, it's the form of the word which means, it's the same, it's the same concept, the same root of sabr, but it means to strive to have patience. So basically, I'm in a situation and it's very difficult for me. But if I strive and I'm trying to be patient, I'm exerting effort in order to try to be patient, that's tasabbara. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying that whoever does that, whoever strives to have patience, then Allah will give them patience. So the answer to the question of how can I be given this gift of patience, well, the way that I can be given this gift of sabr is to try and to strive. And even when it's difficult, I'm trying and I'm struggling in order to be patient. And when I do that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless me with patience. And so it's important to understand this concept again, that sabr, patience in its true form, doesn't only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't come from ourselves. And the way to reach that is by striving to have that patience. So that's the first part of this ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, He's commanding us to have patience. The second part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after isbiru is wasabiru. Sabiru now, again, you'll notice it's the same root, but it's a different level of patience. Now, in this form of the verb, it's now talking about when you're having patience, but it's you're exerting patience against an opposing force. So it's not just to have patience, but it's to have patience against something else, against another force, and then to have more patience than that opposing force. And so, obviously we know, for example, that shaitan is always, shaitan doesn't give up. So in a sense, shaitan has sabr, right? Because shaitan is persevering and he's being patient in the sense that he's continuing to to fight, to wage his war against us. And he doesn't give up. And so when we have patience against shaitan, when we have sabr against shaitan, that is, sabiru, because we're exerting patience against an opposing force. In this case, it's shaitan. And this is obviously, the case with anything in life, which is, it's pulling us in the opposite direction of sabr. And so this is a higher level of sabr. And then the third. Now subhanAllah, the reason this ayah is so powerful and so important is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us 4 commandments. And these 4 commandments, we find out why He's giving us these commandments at the end of the ayah. And inshallah we'll get to that. But these 4 things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us basically are ingredients for what will come at the end of the ayah. So the third commandment is warabitu. Now, ribat is an even higher level of sabr. Ribat is ribat is talking about a situation like, for example, the root of the word is referring to a situation where, for example, when you're in battle or you are assigned to sort of defend a post. And you're standing there and you don't know when the enemy will come or when the enemy will attack, but you have to stay firm. And you have to, you have to stay and you have to be firm even without the knowledge of when the attack will come or how the attack will come. And that is ribat. And ribat is the highest level, because if you think about ribat, it's a situation where, you have to be firm even when it's very difficult, and even when you don't know when or how something's going to hit, but you still have to stay firm. And that's ribat. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, and so these are almost like stages of sabr. And the highest level is ribat. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wattaqullah. And taqwa now is the fourth and final a commandment in this ayah. And taqwa is not just fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God consciousness, realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close at every moment. And so, the scholars say that actually taqwa is the source of the fuel for sabr, that the fact that I know that Allah is near and I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me, that is what gives me the fuel and the ability to have patience. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, now after giving us these 4 commandments, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. In order, if you really want to, so that you may be successful. So all of, these 4, ingredients, or these 4 commandments, are what is necessary for success. Sabr, again, usually translated as patience, is really so much more profound than just patience. Because in fact, the scholars explain that sabr is necessary not only when things are difficult, but when things are good as well. And in fact, they talk about how it's sometimes more difficult to have sabr in times of ease than it is to have sabr in times of hardship. And I think, there are different reasons why that's the case. But what they say is that, anyone, whether, believer or disbeliever, can possibly be patient in times of hardship. And we've seen this, that, something hits, which you can't control, a natural disaster or sickness or loss. And, people are able, to withstand that and to be patient. And that's possible. But when things are easy and when things are good, this is where it's very, very difficult to have sabr. And what that means is in the case of ease, what is necessary? What is the necessary type of sabr in ease? Well, it has to do with, for example, not exceeding the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me with money. So sabr in that circumstance would be that I spend the money in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to spend it. Sabr in that situation would be that I give, a portion of it for zakah. That I may be tested with, for example, having to deal in interest. I have the money, I have the business, whatever it is, and I need to, decide, am I going to have sabr and not, break the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that case, that's sabr, right? So sabr is also keeping myself following the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in times of ease. Because really, if you think about it, during the times of ease, that's also when it's easier to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I have more space, right? I have more ability and more space to really do that. And that's where it takes more self-control and more, perseverance in order to not, to go outside of the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put. And yet when things are difficult, say if there's a loss, well, I don't really necessarily have a choice. I can't change it. And so sometimes, that it's even easier to have patience or to have sabr in the times of difficulty than it would be in times of ease. And I think that another very difficult trap that happens even in times of ease with regards to sabr is that when I have something and I have ease, or I have something that I really, really love, and I have, it's abundant and I have it, and here's where you need sabr, is it's very easy to start to depend on that thing instead of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the case of money, for example, suppose that I am blessed with all of this money, like Qarun, for example, in the Quran, it talks about how this man was so rich that even just the keys to his treasures, or to what he owns, just the keys to his treasures was a treasure in and of itself, because he owned so much, he had so much. But the problem was that you can, now here's where the test is, that it's very easy then to start to depend on that gift itself. And so this is a lack of sabr, right? I have to have sabr in order to remember that my dependence is only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of what I have. So instead of, in the case again of money, that I might start to think that, I feel secure and my dependence is on my money rather than on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet when that money is taken away, well, now I sort of don't have a choice except to depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this scenario, it almost took more sabr and more perseverance in the time of ease, in order to keep myself from becoming dependent on the gift itself that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me. And similarly, in terms of not just dependence, but in terms of love, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us gifts, a lot of times what happens, and this is, human beings are absolutely susceptible to this, is that we start to love the gifts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these gifts which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us have the tendency to replace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our hearts. And we start to become very, very attached to the gift itself. And this is a huge test. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, is this concept of sabr is necessary in both ease and hardship. And it's, we should be very, very careful not to think that during times of ease we just relax, because that's when we start to fall. We have to know that times of ease are just as much of a test as the times of hardship. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives, He is also testing us. And with every blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives comes a test that is associated with that blessing. And we can see that, in any kind of blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. If, for example, the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given someone is beauty. Suppose that, everybody wants to be beautiful, right? And suppose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed someone with that gift of beauty. Now, it's a gift, yes, this is true, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a blessing. But at the same time, it's also a test, because now the test is, what are you going to do with that beauty? Are you going to show it, or are you going to cover it? Are you going to, is it going to be a test for you in terms of how, you might be able to use that beauty to take a path which is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now with that blessing came this test. And in the same way, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with intellect, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the human being the ability to think and reflect and choose, the blessing of free choice. This is a blessing that was only given to human beings and was not given to any other creation, human beings and jinn. And yet with this blessing that I have intellect, and I have the ability to think, and I have the ability to reflect, and the ability to choose, this is a huge blessing, but with it comes a huge responsibility and a huge test. How am I going to use that gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Am I going to use it to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or am I going to use it to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that brings me to the second part that I wanted to talk about, which is these ayahs that we have learned since we were children, and many of us probably recite in our salawat, and that is Surah Al-Asr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in these ayat, very short ayat, has put very, very profound truths. And Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, used to say that, that just this, if you just knew this chapter alone, it would be enough to understand the whole religion. There's so much in this surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins Surah Al-Asr by making an oath. And we'll find throughout the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala making an oath. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts wow sometimes before one of His creations, He is making an oath by that creation. So the same way that we human beings, if we really, really want someone to believe us or to understand that what we're saying is very important, what do we say? We say wallahi. So what we're saying when we say wallahi is we're saying wow in front of Allah, which means we're swearing by Allah. And this usage is intended to put emphasis on what is to come after. It's intended to really make the listener know that what I'm saying is absolutely certain. It's absolutely true. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also makes oaths by His creation. And in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making an oath by Al-Asr. And, this is, He's making an oath by time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing this in order to put emphasis, or to really, stress the importance of what truth He's going to say after. So the surah begins with Wal Asr. And after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Wal Asr, Innal insana lafi khusr. Now here there's actually two more places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts emphasis. The first emphasis is by swearing by time. The second one is inna. Inna is another way to put emphasis. Indeed, surely, for sure. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Al-insana la, and here the lam is putting further emphasis. لَفِي خُسْرٍ. So now what is this truth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting so much emphasis on in 3 separate ways? And that truth is that indeed mankind is in a state of loss. Mankind is in a state of loss. So this is that truth which is so important that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing. What is mankind in a state of loss of? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that we are in a state of losing. All the time we're in a state of losing. So the question is, well, what are we losing? Well, the answer really is we're in a state of losing everything, because in this life we're in a state of loss of everything. I mean, time, we're losing time, health, age, our life, our provision, our possessions, everything is slowly being lost with every moment that we live. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes on to say, illa. So Allah, you have this universal truth, which is innal insana lafi khusr. But, and this is so important, that there is a group of people who are saved from this loss. That this is a general statement which is said, but then there's an illa. Illa means except. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a general statement, a general truth, and then says illa because there's a particular group who is saved from this universal loss. So then the question is, who is this group? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. So the first characteristic of that group, which is going to be saved from this loss, so that everything that I'm doing is no longer being lost. It's no longer being lost if I have these characteristics. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what they are. They are الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So it's faith, iman. The first thing was iman, belief, faith. But with that belief and with that iman has to come action. So next is وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, that they do good works, that the faith is there, but the action is also there. And then after that comes another one. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So there are 4 characteristics in order to be saved from this universal state of loss. And that is faith, good actions, تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ and تَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ is, calling one another, enjoining the truth. So it's standing for truth and calling for truth. And lastly is sabr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And having sabr and enjoining sabr. That this is one of the absolute necessary components of, being exempt from loss. So if you have those 4 components, that the believer who does righteous deeds and who stands and calls for truth and who has sabr will be in a situation where they are no longer losing. So everything is being saved and everything will be coming back to them, inshallah, in the hereafter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow any of the actions of the believer to be lost. And so, subhanAllah, this is sort of like, inshallah, I want to end on this. It's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, that there will be, there will be a morning, right? There will be a dawn. There will be that light after the difficult struggle of perseverance and the difficult struggle of sabr. That this is what comes at the end, and that is ultimate success. That is that nothing that I'm doing, nothing that I'm losing, or nothing that I'm struggling against is going to be lost. And that inshallah it will be saved with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And only those things which I give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those things which I never lose. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم.